Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I'm still Michael. And this is still Vintage Cinema Rewind.
And we're doing High and Low, the deep dive.
Yeah.
One of the all-time Kurosawa classics of 1963.
It is certainly a movie I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah, as we said in the primer episode, probably not going on your top 100 movie list of all time. I'm definitely considering it. It's definitely a valid option for the top 100.
It's certainly, you could do worse. I've certainly seen many, many worse movies.
Yeah, I mean, actually, like, if we go and compare the legacy of this movie, already front-running it a little bit, like, this is number 6 on Letterboxd top 250 of all time, and this is number 84 on the IMDb top 250 list.
Shit.
Like, this is considered one of the great movies of all time. If you look at it from the sense of the influences, like we talked in the prior episode, like, that's kind of valid, right? Like, this movie influences so many directors and so many films of the last 30 years, like some of my favorite movies of all time. Like, obviously, Seven is kind of one that I would compare this to, like Zodiac, David Fincher movies. We talked about The Batman, which you even, like, literally brought up as we were watching it.
That's right, I did.
So, do you remember what exactly it was that tipped you off about The Batman?
No, I don't actually. I don't. The final scene, though, is very Batman, though.
Right.
It's very Batman.
Yeah, it's kind of cool in that sense, right?
It is. So should we get into, again, I want to say, like, I don't hate this movie. I don't even dislike this movie. I just don't think this movie was for me.
Yeah, that's fair.
And again, I think I really, really liked the first half, and then it kind of lost me in the second half when the plot went in a slightly different direction.
Yep.
I'm just going to put my cards on the table. They should have killed the fucking kid. So here's what happens. So it's his kid's best friend gets kidnapped in lieu of his own son, June.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's all this back and forth about blah, 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 blah. Should I pay? Should I not? Because he knows that if he does pay, he's essentially bankrupt, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, after all that, the killer contrives a situation where they have to hand over the money without them noticing him. He does. They throw the money out of the train. He grabs it, and then he just kind of lets the kid go. Right. So they recover the kid, but they don't recover the money.
Yeah.
And then the second half delves into, well, we need to catch this guy and recover that man's money, right?
Yep.
I need to preface this by saying that, like, I've written quite a few stories in my time, and I have to own up to the fact that when I cast my gaze over my shoulder, I just see a road paved with dead children. I love killing children. It is my favorite thing. So when the kid survived, I was kind of like, huh.
Yeah.
Like, and again, I'm not a monster. I'm not a monster, but I just think, again, I really liked Gondo, and I felt for him in the struggle of, like, do I save this kid and by doing so endanger my family's financial welfare, right?
Yeah, and their future.
In their future. So he does, and then they recover the kid. To me, though, I'm kind of just like, suddenly the stakes dramatically lowered for me, right?
Well, and there's kind of a shift too, right? In that sense, because, and leading up to that moment, right? Like, the train scene is kind of one of those, like, unexpectedly amazing sequences that you're just not really expecting to have such a weight to it.
I know, right? Like, they did it really well.
Exceptionally well. And, like, you and I were watching, and basically, like, the kidnapper says, okay, hop on this train. I'll give you more details once you're on it, and we'll do the swap then. And so you're expecting the swap to happen on the train or at one of the stops that the train is making. And so all the police agents are kind of undercover on the train, and they're all, like,
super conspicuous.
Super conspicuous. Like, so easy to point out, right?
Like, oh, those are cops.
Yeah. Like at one point, the one guy even says to the other guy that, like he just looks like a cop.
Yeah,
like,
the bald guy.
Yeah.
They actually make jokes at his expense quite a bit. They're
Yeah.
Like him and the other guy are just like, he's just kind of like, all right, try not to look like a cop. And the other guy's like, oh, you need plastic surgery not to look like a cop.
Yeah.
Come on. So,
yeah, and it's so accurate too. Like, it's kind of like, it's a little meta in that sense. You know, as we are kind of, like, sitting on the train, they get the call, and it's like, oh, this deal isn't actually happening right now on the train. They're actually just going to throw the money out while seeing the kid go by on the train because they want to make sure the kid's still alive. And then hopefully the kidnapper leaves the kid after they do the exchange.
Right.
And that becomes, like, super compelling because it's so unexpected. Like, you really don't see that coming. And it feels really high stakes in that moment too, because, like, there's so many ways that can go wrong. And, like, Gondo could have gotten cold feet at that moment. Like, oh, like, how am I going to know that this kid's actually going to, like, live?
Yeah.
And, like, he's literally throwing out his entire life out the window of this train.
His entire life savings out of a train for some kid that's not even his.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, that moment is really compelling, right? And maybe the fact that it switches over in that moment, like, it's tough because immediately after that, there's, like, a really old-timey, like, cut to all the newspapers and, like, they're like...
Yeah. It's funny. I was like, wow, they're doing this unironically. Yeah.
Yeah, like, it's so funny because that's, like, one of those, like, antiquities of cinema.
Yeah, it's something that's been parodied so much that you're just like, huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then after that, like, we have to suddenly pivot what we care about, right? And, like, the kid and this conflict of, do I give away the money in my life for this kid that's not mine? To have us then pivot over to, like, are these police officers going to get this guy or not? And, like, why should we care about the police officers getting this guy? Like, maybe what needed to happen is maybe this character needed to be more fleshed out in the first act. Like, maybe the kidnapper needed to be more fleshed out as, like, more villainous or something, like, more diabolical.
See, my whole thing is, if the kidnapper had taken the money and then killed the kid, I would have been like, fuck this guy.
Right.
Like, I want him dead.
Right.
And I think that might have prevented the stakes from lowering me, because now it's like, I guess to me, it is kind of just like, it's easy to sympathize with Gondo when he's like, do I risk my family's fortune for this kid who's not mine? Because that is an interesting dilemma.
Yeah.
But then the dilemma is resolved. I'm kind of like, he'll be fine.
Well, I guess the new dilemma is, can they get the money in time to save Gondo's life, to save his future?
Right. But again, I guess just for me, I was kind of just like, he'll get another job. He'll be fine.
And I think that's maybe speaking to the times, right? Like, maybe at this point in time and in the current environment that we're in, the stakes don't feel as high anymore after the kid's been saved, because, like, who really cares about this rich guy's wealth?
Yeah, I know, right?
Especially too, and that's maybe part of the genius of this movie, is that in the second act, when we get into, like, Dope Alley and we get into, like, the slums of this city, and you see, like, the contrast between, like, how crazy rich the Gondo family is.
Yeah, and I really love the framing of it. It's this shitty little village, and then his basically estate is just, like, looming on a hill over the village, right? You're kind of just like, and I did think it was interesting how we spend most of the first act inside that villa, and then you see it from the outside, and you're kind of just like, oh, all right.
You definitely lose, like, a little bit of respect for the Gondo family, right?
Yeah, well, I guess it's just like a child's life is obviously worth more than all those millions of dollars.
Yep.
The 5 million yen that he surrendered, right?
Right.
The other thing that I mentioned in the primer is that I actually liked Gondo quite a bit as a main character.
Yes.
And he kind of just leaves the movie.
Yeah, that's the other kind of interesting thing that happens, right? And him re-entering in the final scenes actually adds quite a bit to the movie. Like, I think that's where, like, you got pulled back in, is when Gondo appears.
It's like,
right
oh, hey, Gondo's back.
Yeah. Again, I can't fault that, right? Like, it's, again, like, we made the Full Metal Jacket reference in part 1, but it's kind of like when Gomer Pyle's character essentially gets, he kills himself in the first act.
And then he also
spoilers.
Kills Sergeant Hartman, too.
Yeah.
And you're kind of just like, well, this movie just became less interesting.
Yeah. And so, that only happens a few times in cinema, but Full Metal Jacket's one of my all-time favorite movies.
That's on my top 100. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's just like a slight different perspective change, and I think this movie still works quite a bit in the second act. I just see it as not for you, because and part of it's just because, like, it really hard pivots into, like, a police procedural.
And I think to the comparison with Full Metal Jacket is that we have our main character. What is his fucking name?
Joker.
Again? Joker. Yeah, we're still firmly joined at the hip with Joker throughout part 1 and part 2, despite how radically different they are.
Yep.
Whereas, again, Kingo just kind of waltzes off.
Yeah,
he's kind of sidelined. And again, I'll say that, like, again, sometimes with stories, like, logic has to dictate the flow of events. And, like, what is he going to do? Is he going to be, like, riding around in the squad car investigating with the cops?
Yeah.
It would be weird, right?
It would be weird.
You'd be like, get out of here, man. Go sell some shoes.
Actually, funny enough, so this movie is actually based on an American book called King's Ransom by Ed McBain.
I saw that.
And so Ed McBain wrote the screenplay for The Birds, as a side note, which is kind of cool.
That is pretty cool.
Kurosawa read this book, wasn't actually that impressed with the writing style, the novel, even like the ending he changed. Like he changed significant parts of the story.
He was kind of like, fuck this.
But he was just like really compelled by the idea of the kidnapping, apparently. And in the original story, like actually I believe Gondo is the one who captures the kidnapper, right?
Okay.
And so it ends with Gondo and the inspector having a conversation together at the end. I couldn't get into too much details about how the book actually ends online, but it's interesting that Kurosawa decided to make such a drastic change to the narrative of the second half of the story. But I think it does make more logical sense that Gondo's obviously, again, not in the car running around trying to solve this case, right?
Yeah, he's got his fists up and he's, you know.
It's actually funny, too, because even though Gondo doesn't appear in the second act, it's actually the kid and the chauffeur who have a little bit of screen time in the second act doing.
Because they're trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah, like the amateur investigative work where they're trying, like, and the chauffeur feels, I actually like the chauffeur character a lot.
You feel bad. You really feel for the guy, right?
Yeah, he's really good at showing like or being an empathetic character. Like you really feel bad for the guy. Like, you know, he obviously unfortunately thrust into this situation and like he feels like very conflicted too, right? Like he wants his kid back, but he's like, oh, like, you know, don't throw your life away for me, Gondo. Like it's so interesting watching this character kind of break down, right? Like it's him who's really losing something at the end of the day.
Well, yeah. And again, I think that was a masterful touch because, like, having the kid's grieving father present.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you just kind of see him, like, hanging his head in shame in the corner of the room. And you're just kind of like, ugh.
Yeah, it's really, like, heart-wrenching because he's not, like, a key player necessarily even in this story. But he feels like that moral obligation to Gondo, and like he's touring his kid around the slums to try to figure out like some grain of.
You know what? I don't mean to cut you off, but like just kind of articulating this now, like if maybe the police had their leads and run dry and they'd just given up, and then Gondo had investigated it himself, like maybe I would have been like, all right, like let's do this.
Yeah,
that would have maybe been a little more preposterous, right?
Yeah,
but you know, maybe I would have cared a little more.
And see, like I didn't have a problem with that. Like, yeah, I felt the jank too, and that transition in between the first act and the second act. But I got more into the idea of like, okay, how are the police going to navigate this situation, and how are we going to catch this guy on the facts that we know? And like for me, I actually really, really enjoyed like, okay, we know this piece of this story, so like how is this going to connect? Like, okay, like because of how he saw the house and like he said it was hot at this point in time, and so like here's kind of a heat map of the city on this day, and like and all of these kind of elements, and like, oh, like, you know, we could hear in the recording of him talking that sound of the train, and like, okay, well, what type of train is it? And like all of those elements, like I found that really compelling, and like that element of like competency porn, and like, okay, like how are these people going to solve the mystery here? I really got into that because that's something that I really do enjoy. I think this movie becomes like more typical if Gondo becomes like the hero of the story, and Gondo's not. I don't think that Gondo's actually the hero of the story even, right?
I guess not. And like I'm just kind of articulating this now. I do vaguely remember my old film professor saying that like Japanese cinema really, really stresses the value of like the collective in the community.
Right.
Just different values, right? Like I remember we watched a scene from something where everybody's huddled together and then some guy stands up and walks off on his own. And like in American films, you'd say, okay, that's the hero, right?
Right.
He's the individual who's standing out. Whereas in Japanese cinema, their instinct is like, that's bad. Like he's not part of the group anymore. He's alone, right?
Right.
And so maybe this is kind of and I'm just talking up my ass here. Maybe this is like a difference between like Western cinema versus more Eastern type cinema, where like it's more about the ensemble than the individual.
Yeah, and I've seen that as well. Like I said, Shin Godzilla is a movie that I actually didn't enjoy all that much, and it's considered one of the great Godzilla movies as well.
Yeah, you know, I tried watching it and I ended up turning it off.
I finished it, but I didn't love it, and I think that again speaks to the difference in collectivism versus individualism.
Right. Like, who the fuck am I supposed to attach myself to, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the second act of this movie. I'll say as well that, like, Seven is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it kind of does a similar-ish thing in which we're trying to, like, figure out who's doing these murders. And actually, that movie pins itself, the story, to the two main investigators.
Right.
And so we care about those two main investigators throughout the story, right? And we get into their personal lives and everything. And so their quest to solve the murders and capture the serial killer,
John Doe,
yeah, is a lot more compelling in that sense than a movie like this, where it devolves into like, okay, the police as a group are like, you know, we're gonna cross the I's and dot the T's, and I said that backwards.
It's kind of just like, I'm like, I don't give a, you know, like, they're all fine actors and fine enough characters, but I felt like I was standing in the room looking around. I'm like, I don't give a fuck about any of these people.
Right, yeah. And I think that there's definitely something to say. Like, I think that Western audiences might genuinely not appreciate that as much. And, like, your strong cases, you didn't appreciate that.
Yeah, but again, I think if they'd shot the kid, and, like, people at home are listening, like, Michael really wanted that kid.
And maybe
dead.
that's just something that they couldn't do in 1960. Maybe they'll do that
that's actually
in the
a good
remake
point.
too, right?
Yeah, where it's like, if they'd shot the kid, I would have been like, oh, well, fuck this guy. Like, let's find him.
Yeah, and maybe that's just something that, like, the story couldn't have done at that point in time and would have really upset audiences.
I guess so, right? It would have upset most normal people, but the storyteller in me would have been like, yeah! The stakes have raised!
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe we should jump ahead and talk about the assailant, the kidnapper himself, because I did.
Sure.
That is kind of when I returned.
Okay.
My soul slid back into my body.
Throughout the first act of this movie, you're like, who is the kidnapper? And I strongly suspected that it was the secretary that was the kidnapper.
Or like the three guys.
Yeah.
The three shitty businessmen.
It's really effective that this movie, like, spends the first 15 minutes on that side of the story and, like, automatically thrusts some, like, key suspects into the limelight, right?
Yeah.
And immediately after that is when the kid is kidnapped, and you're like, well, who could it be, right? And the other part of this that also complicates this situation is the two boys are out playing cowboys and Indians, and they actually decide to swap outfits, like, before they go out one final time.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's also the added wrinkle where Gondo is talking to his kid. He's like, hey, like, make sure you hide and then strike when he's not looking, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then that's part of the reason, too. The kid's like, well, I hid like you told me to, and then he was gone. And I was like, whoops.
Yeah. Yeah, and so then it gets revealed in the second act that it's nobody. Like, it's a nobody.
It's some dude.
Yeah.
Not only is it some dude, it's a medical intern, which I thought was very compelling because, like, when you're imagining a kidnapper, you're imagining some, like, desperate, down on his luck, incel-looking dude, right? And then it turns out it's just this young man in a white lab coat who works in a clinic, right?
Yeah.
So you're kind of just like,
yeah, and he works down in, like, you know, the shanty town that the Gondos overlook in their villa above everybody.
Right. They're like towering fortress.
Yeah, and he's, like, essentially over some period of time, like, grown to really resent the Gondo family because of where they live and their status, right? Like, he doesn't actually know them personally. He knows nothing about the shoe company or anything. Yeah,
and then that leads to the really effective final scene where the guy has gotten the death penalty and he wants to talk to Gondo.
Yeah.
And again, this is where the Batman comparison comes in. It's almost like Batman going to Arkham Asylum to meet the Joker.
Yep.
And Gondo just sits down and the guy comes in and he walks in very confidently. Like, you know, some guards have I thought it was cool how some guards had, like, their hands on his elbows and he just kind of, like, shrugged them off and then sit down and he's, like, all confidence and he's basically just like, you know, well, what are you doing now? And Gondo basically just shrugs. He's like, well, I got another job.
Yeah.
Like, I'm working at a smaller shoe company. And the guy, I can't even remember his name. The bad guy, let's just call him. He's kind of just like he's being very antagonistic.
Yeah.
And Gondo even is like, why did you want to talk to me again? And the guy just like, oh, I just couldn't stand the thought of you thinking I went to the gas chamber. I couldn't stand the thought of you pitying me. Going to the gas chamber or whatever. And yeah, I thought it was very effective how we don't really get his tragic backstory. He just kind of mentions, you know, like, I grew up in the slums, like, my mom died, and, like, used to look up at that villa and, like, I'd started hating you. And poor Gondo's just sitting there like, bro, I don't even know you.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really interesting, like, masterclass in acting. Like, he basically just keeps saying, like, I'm not scared to die, blah, 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 blah. But then he starts, like, visibly trembling.
Yeah.
And then he's kind of just like, I'm not trembling because I'm scared. I just really hate you.
Right. And the whole time, like, Gondo's just looking at him, like, pitying him, right? Because he's like, I had nothing to do with any of your past, right?
Yeah, Gondo even, like, and there's also kind of the age difference where Gondo clearly has, like, 20 years on this guy.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, okay, like, Gondo almost seems a little bit, like, has, like, a shred of, like, paternal concern for the guy. Like,
yeah.
Just, like...
Well, and I think that this scene is really effective as well because it made me question, like, are both these characters prisoners of the class that they were essentially born or inherited into?
Yeah, well, there's also the added detail that I think they mentioned this in passing a couple times, that Gondo himself grew up poor, but he just sort of, well, basically he married rich.
Yeah.
Basically, there's a line about how his father-in-law's dowry is what gave him the fortune he needed to, like, accumulate all this wealth.
Right.
So they're kind of two people from the same neighborhood. Gondo just got out somehow. And then what I found was interesting too is that, like, this kid, the bad guy, he's a medical intern. So, like, he's presumably on track to be a doctor. And at least in the West, doctors make pretty good money.
Well, yeah, and I guess I don't know if he was actually, like, on his way to being a doctor or not. I can't remember if they actually said that outright.
They specifically called him an intern.
Okay, yeah, he was an intern, but he's also working with, like, the drug addicts of society, right? Like, and that's where he
recruits two heroin addicts to, like, do his dirty work for him.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and he's, like, a really sinister character too, right? Because, like, he ends up killing the heroin addicts. That's part of what I really liked about the second act of the movie is when they finally find the place where the kid was held, they find two dead drug addicts there, and they surmise that essentially, because they have an inkling that it's this medical intern at this point, that he's actually intentionally killed them by giving them pure heroin in order to shut them up, essentially.
So he did kill them, yeah.
Yeah. And then, later on in the movie, when we get down into Dope Alley, which is One Dope Alley.
I'm pretty sure that's where Batman's parents were killed.
Yeah. And he actually goes and tests out the drug again on them because the police have set up the trap of, like, well, we're going to essentially trap him into thinking that they're not actually dead.
They need more dope.
Yeah, they're trying to extort him again,
which is a great scene. I thought that was very clever.
Really effective, yeah. And then they go down there, and it's interesting, too, because so he tests out the drug on the drug addict, and, like, the police don't even really care about this girl either. Like, they're like, oh, she's dead, and then that's the last thing we hear about her,
she's
right?
dead, yeah.
Yeah, like, her life is actually worth less in this situation than anybody else, right? It's interesting that we don't linger on that at all.
I had actually completely forgotten about that until you mentioned it. So yeah,
and I think that's very intentional of the movie.
Yeah, just screw her. I found the bad guy again. I liked that they left a lot of his backstory ambiguous.
Yep.
He's just kind of this. Because again, and I actually really like the detail that, like, he had a good job, right? Like, he would have probably been okay, but just this boiling pot of resentment and, like, class struggle just flared up inside him, and he couldn't seem to resolve that within himself.
Yeah, no, for sure. What I like about this movie as well is that there's not really a happy ending to this either, right?
No, like, we end on this bad guy basically freaking out and having to be dragged back to his cell and presumably sedated.
Well,
right?
And Gondo, like, despite the, there's this big triumphant moment of, like, okay, Gondo's going to give the money away. And then it's like, oh, like, Gondo's a national hero for, selflessly, like, giving away all of his wealth in order to save this child.
Kid, yeah.
And then
I thought they were going to do something with that too, right?
Well, no, I think they did something really effective with that, and that basically, like, all of the creditors come and they're like, we don't give a shit. Like, like, you still owe us all this money, and you threw it all away like an idiot on some random kid.
Yeah, there's that great line where he's like, you can't pay a ransom and leave us to foot the bill.
Yeah. It's really, really strong stuff. And, like,
I thought they were going to do something with that where like Gondo suddenly becomes a hero and then suddenly like his company can't fire him, right?
Right.
Because it would be bad for PR.
But it's a much more like a darker, grittier ending, right? Like he essentially gets tossed out of the company because he can't take it over and the other guys all don't like him. And then all of his creditors are like, pay up or we're going to repossess your entire life, which they do.
Yeah, it's a great moment when they catch the guy and they're like, yay, we got him. And they're like talking to they're like, we couldn't recover 200,000 yen. That's probably what he spent the dope on.
Right.
And he's like, oh, thank you. And then we see that the creditors are already there and they're auctioning everything off.
Yeah, it's really strong. I thought that was really, really good. Yeah, like you said, he ends up getting the other job. And I think that's maybe the only thing positive about the ending is that eventually Gondo's going to be all right. Like he's a guy who cares so much about shoes.
Jesus fucking Christ. Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of the reason what deflated the stakes for me a little bit is I was kind of just like, yeah, he's going to be fine. Like, he's just going to go get another job, right?
Well, and I think that's part of the commentary, too, of the movie, right? Is that Gondo's going to be fine.
Yeah, he's fine. Relax.
Yeah, like he's going to get another job. Like, okay, maybe he's not going to be as crazy rich as he was before the events of the movie, but he's going to be okay.
Yeah, and that's what I found so compelling about the bad guy. It's like, you know, you probably would have been better off than most people if you just not done what you did.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think that the bad guy is actually, I can empathize with that character and that burning hatred that he has for years about having the boot on his throat the whole time, right? And then like,
yeah, I guess.
even though he's intelligent and he is maybe able or has the ability to move up in his class, like he still has deep resentment for those people.
And you know what? I was going to say that, like, you know, I remember, this is a weird tangent, but I remember working at a department store like 10 years ago, and my boss would tell me like all these wild, outlandish stories about like the crazy, complicated, creative, intelligent ways people would steal things.
Right.
And I remember at the time thinking like, that's so, if you're that smart, why don't you like use your powers for good? But at the same time, that's just, I think my middle class is showing, right? Like, I didn't grow up poor. I've never experienced extreme poverty. So, like, I have friends who grew up in poverty, and, like, you can see how it impacts their view of the world.
Yep.
And I don't want to talk out my ass.
And the other piece of this, too, is, like, on the exact flip side of this, too, is when you're at the top, doing good deeds doesn't fucking mean anything either.
Yeah, I guess so, right?
So... Like, at the end of the day, like, literally the creditors were like, you're an idiot. Like, you paid...
Give us our fucking money.
Yeah. Like, and it's so... like, that's so compelling, too, right? Like, no matter what, you must stick within the confines of, like, where you are in this class system.
Yeah, really. So
I don't know. I thought it was all really effective. I actually thought that part of the movie was really strong.
And again, maybe part of it is just, like, you know, as a rule, like, I don't really care about money,
right,
or living some lavish lifestyle, so like it's hard for me to personally be invested in Gondo's struggle, where it's like, I mean, the kid's fine, you'll make more money.
Yeah. Like, well, and I think that's the point a little bit, but I also think that that's just also kind of, that might be the one thing of this movie that hasn't aged well.
I agree. Yeah.
I actually, going back to the beginning of this movie, like, I thought that this movie had one of the strongest introductions to a movie that I've seen in a long time. Like, at first, I was kind of like, why do we care about this, this national shoe company, right? Like, it's so interesting. Like, I wasn't expecting it to do that, but then, like, it builds such a strong, like, motivation for Gondo. Like, you see that Gondo is he has a moral code to him, right? Like, and he genuinely cares about shoes, like, more than anybody else in this movie.
Yeah, but we also see that he's kind of a prickly asshole, right?
Right.
Like, his wife is kind of, like, you know, begging him to, like, relax and open up. And he's just like, oh, what do you know, woman? And then he's, like, lecturing his son about, like, how to destroy his enemies. I'm like, dude, calm down.
Right.
And you could see that he's sort of been, like, humbled by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Maybe he had to be brought back down to earth a little.
Yeah. It's really effective how, like, complex this movie weaves this story and this character, like, in the first 15 minutes. Like, I write notes while I watch the movies for the podcast, and I kind of stopped writing notes because I was like, this is too complex of a story for me to actually like keep notes on everything going on. Like I just have to pay attention and like stay in the moment to this movie because I don't want to miss anything.
Yeah, I got to keep my head up.
That's usually a sign of like a really good movie is I take less notes than when I love a movie.
Yeah.
So actually a completely random tangent, but Jess and I watched Barry Lyndon for the first time a couple months ago.
Oh, the Kubrick movie.
Yeah, have you seen it?
No, but I've heard of it.
I actually think that it kind of does something really interesting with the movie as well, where it's like the main character is a character that essentially starts with nothing, and he lies, cheats, and steals from the rich for the first act of the movie to get to be in a position of wealth.
Yeah.
And there's a pivot at when he becomes like extraordinarily wealthy, and the narrator says all of the things that made this character be able to achieve the greatness that he has and all of like the moral characteristics of this character are ultimately going to be the downfall of this character in the second act of this movie, because it kind of shows like a character like the kidnapper in this movie, even though they have like a way out, like this character similar to Barry Lyndon has achieved success in some form, and yet there's still that burning like resentment towards others that they just can't get past.
You know, it's funny. This is such a weird tangent, but like I remember watching this really interesting analysis of what's his ass's work.
Are you talking Kubrick?
Tim Burton.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I remember watching a really interesting essay about his work and how they talked about how Kubrick in his early work considered himself this like renegade outsider who was rejected by the system but who was making his own work anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Then 20 years later, though, when he's one of the most well-paid directors of all time, he still has that attitude.
Right.
And it's kind of like, dude, you are the system. What do you mean you don't like the system, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I did look up as well like how much 300 million yen would be, and that's somewhere in the ballpark of like $1 to $2 million USD today.
So it's a lot of money.
It's like, yeah, it's a lot of money. It's funny because back in the 60s, like executives would have gotten paid significantly less as a proportion to like, you know,
now with
our regular wages.
Yeah.
Like, well, and also like just how much money people at the top make compared to now. I like that this movie as well like has some subtle hints that there's like this American influence kind of threaded throughout the movie. You pick up on it very quickly, right? Like right in the opening act with the cowboys and Indians style, like the two kids dressed up like that, right?
Right.
And then throughout the movie, like there's later on in the movie, the nightclub scene, which is again a scene that's really effectively well framed. There's some Americans in the background of that scene as well.
Yeah, I remember you pointed them out.
Yeah, I kept noticing that and kept being like, oh, this is really interesting. Like, I wonder if he's trying to like point out like the American Western influence that is going on in Japan at this point in time. Like,
yeah, and I mean, I'm not a historian, so I don't even really know what was going on in Japan at this time.
Yeah, but it's post World War II, right?
Right, so we're cool.
Yeah.
We're cool, right? Bro ducks.
Yeah. So sequels, prequels, and reboots. I already mentioned that this was based on The King's Ransom. There's actually been a couple remakes since this. I think this would be a really good play, as a side note. Like, and part of that's just straight up because of the way that
the first act is almost a play.
Yeah, it effectively is, and that's why I think people who like the theater would really enjoy this movie. There's actually a remake coming this year by Spike Lee. It's called Highest to Lowest.
Oh.
Yeah, like
okay.
The letter 2.
I get it. Huh.
And it's starring Denzel Washington, Ice Spice, A$AP Rocky, and Jeffrey Wright.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's being produced by A24. So
that should be good then.
It might be a solid remake.
When did you say that's coming out?
I don't know yet. Sometime probably in the second half of the year.
You got to give it to
release date.
You got to give it to A24. They
pick good stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually somewhat interested in this. And Spike Lee's like, you know, a very famous director the past 30 years.
He's been around.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't watched too many Spike Lee movies, but I have watched a couple.
Yeah, me too.
Effects and filming. So this was shot in Yokohama, which is actually the second biggest city in Japan. So I thought that was kind of neat. So as we noted, like the first act of the movie basically takes place in one single room, and there's like really long camera takes of these scenes.
There's actually a lot of oneers,
yeah, like there were each like basically upwards of like 10-minute long scenes using one camera shot and like not cutting. And there's actually some speculation that it was actually the film that they had available to them at the time was actually limiting how long that they were able to do these scenes, because the camera film, there was only about 10 minutes of leeway that you had to film all in one go. So there's some speculation that Kurosawa would have made these scenes even longer if he had the chance.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. Like, and like I said, it basically feels like a play. There's some mention about Kurosawa being kind of difficult on set. Like, apparently he was maybe one of those somewhat of a tyrant on set kind of directors. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, he's in good company, isn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, we already brought up Kubrick, but one of the great scenes in the movie, like the train scene, kind of crazy to film. Like, they basically had to do all of that in one take because they could only get the train for that one shot. All of the extras in that scene were just people, I think, on the train that day.
You're in a movie.
Yeah.
Look sharp.
Yeah. And like, they had 9 cameras. They were filming everything. And there were so many people on set all doing this. They shut down all of the filming, I think in Japan that day, so that they could do all of this together and make sure that it got off without a hitch. And even then, like, I think they said that one of the cameras failed inside of the train. So like, there was some stuff that they just couldn't get.
Oh no.
Some of this was actually kind of guerrilla filmmaking.
And it doesn't look like guerrilla filmmaking at all. So
No.
That's like a testament to the ability on display.
Yeah, absolutely. They actually, like, even the actors rehearsed the scene for a week straight before the take because they literally had the one take to do it. Something that we didn't mention is the fact that Kurosawa used color in this black and white movie at one point in time.
The pink smoke,
Yeah, the pink smoke, which is really cool. Like, it's really effective when it shows up because they mention it early on in the movie. They're like, okay, well, we're going to set up the bags so that, the color appears, and it's either going to be pink if he tries to burn it, and if he tries to put it in water, it's going to be a different color. And you don't really expect that to happen, to actually see like the color appear, and then the pink smoke kind of appears. That's actually the first time that Kurosawa himself used color. Like, he felt like hesitant, I guess, in the 60s to use color. Like, he didn't know that he, as a filmmaker, fully grasped how to utilize color.
He didn't think he understood color.
Yeah. So like, this was them kind of experimenting with it, which is kind of neat. And he kept making movies in black and white for a little while after this too. Look back at the time. So this comes, and we talked about history before, but the way that this came about in this time period was, it was during what's called the economic miracle years in Japan.
Okay.
And then there's the big pivotal, apparently the 1964 Summer Olympics in Tokyo are like a big moment in Japanese history because, like, the trains, for example, that we saw in the movie were actually built ahead of the Olympics in Tokyo. So like, a lot of the infrastructure being built is kind of utilized in this movie. And there's that transition from like the post-war shanty towns and the slums to the Japan that we know now. So this is a really cool time. And like, we talked about this way back when we did The Third Man, that I actually really like these post-war movies that, you can feel the effects of World War II still in the film.
Yeah, right.
Even like the cars and stuff, like there weren't a lot of personal cars at this point in Japan. And so like, seeing some of the cars, like, this is really such a pivotal time in Japan's history. So really cool.
That is interesting.
It was actually released in the U.S. in 1963, the same week that JFK was assassinated too.
I wonder if that affected the...
It did.
Oh.
It did, actually. It was less seen in the U.S., although it's considered, like, it was widely praised at that time too, but...
I'm just kind of thinking of this now. What do you do if your prime minister or president gets shot? Like, how does that affect your mood that day?
It affects everything.
You're just like,
the whole country. Yep.
Whoops.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, legacy of the movie, it's funny because you kept making jokes about foot fetish. Quentin Tarantino actually was inspired by this movie, and the swing dance scene in Pulp Fiction is heavily inspired by the nightclub scene.
Oh, yeah. I can't believe that got past me. I bet you were, Quentin.
It's so funny. The reason why Kurosawa wanted to make this movie is because the penalties in Japan at this time for like stuff like kidnappings were relatively low compared to other crimes.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so he actually wanted to kind of be a little bit of a champion of like reforms. Like, he actually was a relatively political guy, I think.
Was he? Okay.
And he said, like, I saw a quote from him basically saying like, oh, like, I don't go out to make political movies, but a lot of like my thoughts and my angst eventually like flows into the movies over time.
Yeah, and I mean, as it will, right?
Right. After this movie happened, there was an increase in kidnappings in Japan. So it kind of had the opposite
What?
effect.
How?
Yeah, and people like threatened him to kidnap like his daughter and stuff. Like it actually kind of inspired this.
So people saw the movie and they're like, hey, that's a good way to make some quick cash.
Right.
I'm going to kidnap his daughter.
Yeah. So like it's funny because like sometimes what you set out to do backfires horribly on you.
It's sort of like how people, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre killed hitchhiking.
Yeah.
That would have been like if people saw that movie and were like, oh, I should hitchhike more, you know? It's like, what?
Little different, but yeah, I see your point.
Yeah. Huh.
And then obviously like this movie is super impactful to the last like 50 years of police procedurals and class driven movies. Like I don't know, let's get into the personal reviews and the partner factor. Like, I mean, Jess didn't watch this and she had no
I watched
interest
it with
in
you.
but...
I was your partner.
Yeah,
for the
you were my
evening.
partner.
Yeah.
I thought this movie was amazing. I thought this was really good. Like the themes of this movie are very strong and they actually make you think. Like it doesn't tell you, like it doesn't outright say like you should feel this about Gondo and like, you know, Gondo sucks because Gondo's rich. Like, you know, it paints like a really complex narrative. Like Gondo is a human being in this movie.
Yeah,
and
he's not a total...
Right. And there's like a genuine complexity to this narrative that actually like makes you think about things. Like it doesn't just spoon feed you how you should think about every situation in this movie.
It has a certain respect for you as a viewer, which I did appreciate.
Yeah, it really does. And then the second act, again, like I really enjoyed the police procedural aspect of it. And maybe part of it is as well, like there was a very brief time in my life when I considered maybe going into policing because
What?
Which is a little shocking.
You've never told me this.
Genuinely, I considered briefly in grade 12 becoming a police officer because of the problem-solving aspect of this. And so that style of this movie...
You know what? It makes sense to me why you enjoyed this movie so much now.
Yeah, I genuinely thought like that was really cool to see these police officers like narrow in on the criminal and doing so in a way like, okay, they had all of these clues and them putting them together and like investigating these different aspects is really, really cool.
Yeah. And you know what? I think part of the reason maybe I didn't vibe with the second act as much, and we've talked about this before, is that I don't really vibe with mysteries. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is. I'm just kind of like, like,
right.
Sorry, who did what? Like, but yeah. So anyway, yeah, personal reviews, partner factor. I admired this movie quite a bit, but it did lose me in the second half. But it did gain me back towards the end.
Yep.
And I think that's more just into my own preferences and interests when it comes to storytelling.
And it has like such a compelling ending too, right? Like,
oh, God, yeah.
I don't know that there would be many people who wouldn't get back into the story by the end. Because there is something really interesting about those two characters sitting and having that conversation at the end.
There is just something inherently compelling about the hero and the villain sitting down and chatting with each other.
Yeah, especially too because like you said, like it's tough to get Gondo and the kidnapper in a room together, and the way that Kurosawa does it is actually pretty smart.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
If you think about it, if you're Gondo, there is that question in the back of your mind that's lingering of like, why would somebody do this to me, right?
I guess it's kind of like, and you hear about this happening in real life sometimes where like a criminal wants to talk to one of their victims in prison. And like, it's like, I don't know, if someone wrongs you and then they want to talk to you, what do? Do you just go, I'm not interested? Or do you go talk to them, right?
Yeah. The question of why is so...
Especially too if it's a stranger, right? Like if it's someone you love who wrongs you, which happens more often than we like to think, like that's different. If it's just some stranger who tried to ruin your life, you're like, hey, what was all that about? You want to tell me what the fuck that was about?
And there's no satisfying, like it's not really satisfying either, and I think that's what Gondo gets out of the conversation is like
nothing.
There's no satisfying answer here.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it's really beautiful ending. So I thought this movie was great, and I think that more people should probably see this movie and that it should be a little bit more accessible.
Yeah, well, I'd never even heard of this movie until you mentioned it, but I'm glad I saw it.
Yeah, we'll do more Kurosawa in the future.
Yeah, I think we should. I would really like to see Seventh Samurai. And I'd also like to rewatch The Magnificent Seven. That was a good movie.
This might be the year of Japanese cinema because The other thing about this movie is, like, I watched this movie and was like, oh, I need to really watch Godzilla -1 again.
Yeah, that's also a good fucking movie.
So I've started rewatching that. I fell asleep last night and didn't catch the end of it. So
Aww.
I gotta rewatch the last hour. This is the thing though, is so I was watching it and like I was like, okay, I know what's gonna happen next. I gotta get to that part. And then it was like, oh, but next is like the scene where everybody's gonna come together and like try to like come up with a plan to get Godzilla, and like I was like, damn, I really want to watch that scene. And I was like, I'm so tired, I gotta go to bed. So
Yeah.
I concluded at that, but I'm really excited to finish that.
You know what, Blake, if you want to watch that final hour with me after this, I'll watch it with you.
Yeah. So I feel like this movie has pushed me back into Japanese cinema, and like I'm probably gonna go watch a few more Japanese movies after this because I'm kind of interested in Kurosawa's film career.
Yeah,
now.
me too. He has a certain like I liked his visual style. And,
Yes.
like his vision.
Super strong.
So much so that like I don't think I often notice those things unless they're super distinctive.
I think that's like also like a big credit to this movie, right? Is like immediately within the first like in the first half hour of this movie, I was like, oh, this is doing something that I don't think I've seen before.
Yeah, no kidding.
So it's really cool. Like it's something that's definitely worth your time. Yeah, I think that's high and low.
That's
did
high
it.
and low. That's high and low.
We did
You were
it.
high, I was low.
Jesus.
Play me out, Sam.